Hello, you're very welcome to this summer ramble about Castlebellingham and Kilceren. I'm Seamus Bellew from the County Louth Archaeological Historical Society. And until we can organise live excursions, we hope you'll enjoy this tour that looks at some of the buildings and churches. This here is a photograph of the Bellingham Arms from the late 1960s or early 70s as you approach Castlebellingham from Dundalk. So here's a map of where we hope to take our tour. So as you come in the Dundalk Road into Castlebellingham, on your right is the Forge. Then we head out the Dromiskin Road and we come to the Presbyterian Church, and then at 3 there at the junction of those roads, this is the link road out to the motorway, we have the World War II Memorial. And then later on we'll visit the church and the castle, we'll head out the Annagassan Road a wee bit and then up to Kilceren. So here's a photograph of the Forge, now part of the filling station. You can see the doorway is modelled on the detail of a horseshoe. You can see the similar horseshoe shape in the Forge at Killarney. At Castlebellingham, you can see the full display of the blacksmith's tools, the anvil, the hammer and the horseshoes. The Forge was run by the Marley family. Back to the map. We now head out the Dromiskin Road to visit site number 2. This road is also known as the Dromina Road. So here is the Presbyterian Church, or it's a meeting house. It's a 4-bay lancet hall dated 1840. In recent years it was opened for civil wedding ceremonies. The back wall in the church is entirely blank. The church is known as Woodside Chapel. Back to our map, we now come back to the junction of the Dundalk Road, the Dromiskin Road and the link road to the motorway, and just there at that point we have the World War III Memorial, and we'll also take in a few buildings before we visit the castle and the church. So here's the World War I Memorial. It was erected in 1920. Sir Henry Bellingham, whose son Roger was killed in the Great War, Henry was instrumental in the erection of the cross. Our President, Donald Hall, provides full details in his 2011 article. The shape of the cross is in the form of a Celtic cross. The cross was dedicated in 1920 in a ceremony celebrated by Cardinal Logue. In 2020, the cross at the memorial was cleaned and a display panel was erected that contains the details and the names that are on the cross. But again, Donald's article also contains all the details and further background, and there's the link there to another website that contains the details on the memorial as well. Beside the memorial was Foley's tea rooms that were sadly burned in a fire in 2018. Hopefully they will be rebuilt. It had been beautifully retouched in 2016 under a heritage grant. In 2013, on Taoiseach, Enda Kenny called in unannounced on his return home from the funeral of Paddy Linehan, the father of former President Mary McAleese, that took place in Rostrevor. The building, or the tea rooms, date from 1820. Across the road, roughly, in 1916 was located the RIC station. These buildings have since changed. Constable McGee was killed on Easter Monday 1916 at Castlebellingham near the second green as we go into the village. This ornate building was part of the Bellingham estate. It's near where the Rennicks family used to live and had a business. The onlooker is invited to read chapter 3 from Proverbs. Here is the coach house, as part of the Castlebellingham estate, and there's the ornate doorway. Most parishes have a pump, the parish pump. It looks as if Castlebellingham has had 2. The first is near the Foley's tea rooms. You can see the burnt out remains there in the background as well. The second pump is on the green that we mentioned, and near the green it was fenced off in 1916 when Constable McGee was killed. The writing on the pump says Elliott Brothers, Park Street, Dundalk Foundry. So back to our map. We're now going to take in the site of the castle, number 4, and we'll also visit the church and some of the other buildings of interest nearby there. And then we'll head out the Annagaston Road after that. So here's what's known as the Alpine crucifix. The inscription reads, "This crucifix was erected in public homage to our divine Redeemer by Sir Henry Bellingham, Baronet, in pious memory of his beloved wife, Constance." Henry was a convert to Catholicism. The inscription also remembers those deceased benefactors of the parish. Behind the cross is the tree planted by Thomas Bellingham in 1693. Well, so the notice says. Thomas was the diarist who fought in the Battle of the Boyne in 1690. So here's St Mary's Church of Ireland. Its present form dates from 1852. It was designed by Welland and Gillespie. The church was originally built between 1658 and 1669. The information plaque says that James Napper Tandy is buried in the church grounds. He was an Irish revolutionary who died in 1803 in Bordeaux in France. It's been suggested that his remains were later secretly exhumed and buried here in Castlebellingham. His niece was Anne Tandy, who was married to O'Brien Bellingham. Beside the church are the widows' houses. These were built to accommodate widows of estate employees. The widows' houses endowed by Sir William Bellingham, Baronet, and they were erected in 1827. It's hard to see the date there, but that's the little plaque that indicates the date. A zoom in on the apex of the house shows this ornate metallic feature, and you see these type of things in some of the other buildings around the town as well. There is also the Della Roba Revival plaques on the widows' houses. There's one there, and there's the second one there. These were polychrome ceramic plaques, and this one here is of the Virgin Child, and it was executed in the manner of the Della Roba brothers, part of the 15th century Renaissance method. And this was revived in the late 19th century in England and brought locally to Castlebellingham by Sir Henry. At the corner, near the crucifix, is Southgate House, home of Sidney Bellingham. You can see his initials, the front, see this building here, and this is Southgate House here. This is the building on the side here with the red side, and there's one of the plaques there as well. And then on the front, it fronts onto the main street, and underneath the window, you can see the initials 1808 SB 1896 for Sidney Bellingham. He had spent a good part of his life in Canada and returned to Castlebellingham in 1894 on inheriting the estate. He left the estate to his nephew Sir Henry after he died in 1900, aged 91. And this is just an old print from a card as well that says the Protestant Church and the Southgate House there as well. Now this is an example just across from the widows' houses of another of the houses on the estate. And we're indebted to Christine Casey for the fine detail that I'm going to just read out very briefly. This is an example of the finest expression of the cottage ornate style. It's an example of a two-story house. Its tall gable, and it's richly modelled chimney stack, and it's got oriel windows and an impressive array of elaborate decorative barge boards. So here's the gateway leading in to the castle. This is this is the front of it here as you come in from the village, and this is on the way out. It's towered and battlemented, and it was built in the second half of the 19th century, roughly around 1860. Before that gateway was built, this here was the former gate lodge across the road from the castle, and it was built about 1830. It was called the Bowling Green Lodge, as the estate's bowling green was situated between the lodge and the river. So here's a photograph of the castle, and we will now visit the castle. The castle, it's castellated in the style of Sir Geoffrey Wyatville, according to Christine Casey, and it was on the site of the Gernan Castle that was burned in 1690. A new house was then built in the style of Bewley about 1712, built by Henry Bellingham, and it was remodelled in 1798, and there was further remodelings later on. Prior to the name Castlebellingham, the village was known as Gernanstown. So this is a zoom in on the porch, or on the front door of the castle. It was opened by the present owners at the Corscaddens, and they also owned Cabra Castle in 2014. The coat of arms over the doorway was restored by the new owners, and you can see that it's an impaled coat of arms, and the left part is quartered, and they're the quartered Bellingham arms for Sir William Bellingham, the first baronet, and his wife was Hester Cholmondeley. They're the Cholmondeley arms, and then the quarter arms are further broken down into different families. This here is the arms of Bellingham. Burnside is an old family from about the 1300s. The Bellinghams married a Burnside heiress. These are the arms of Moore for Sir William's grandmother, and these are the arms of Montgomery for his mother. The next slide shows the back of the castle. Before the Corscaddens came, it was owned by the Keenans, and before that, it belonged to the Meehan family. So the exterior features of the house, the towers, the turrets, the turret buttresses, and the crenulations date from several remodelings. The first of these remodelings took place in 1834 by Thomas Smith, and he also worked on Barmead. So you can see two stone heads there over that window there. And this fella here looks a little bit hungry. It must be nearly time for his dinner. So out towards the back of the castle then we've got the stables. On the left in the photograph here we've got the late Stephen O'Donnell from Dundalk, along with his first cousin. Their grandfather worked on the estate, in particular involved with the horses and the stables. This interesting photograph here can be dated by the family crest that was kind of flagged or kind of just put over the fixed coat of arms, and it represents the day that Sir Henry married his second wife, Lelgard, daughter of the Baroness Grey de Ruthin, and the Grey de Ruthin crest is a griffin, and you can see the griffin there. So it's amazing how you can date a photograph just from the coat of arms. So now we've left the castle and we'll go inside St. Mary's Church of Ireland. On the way in, we just passed the gravestone of William Johnson Bellingham, and he was the son of Sir Alan, 2nd Baronet, and his wife was Felicia, 1831 to 1909. I suppose this doesn't particularly have any significance, just from the fact that I missed him when I was doing an article in 2009. And here's the Stafford family vault, whereby we remember the family of Stafford of Maine of this parish, 1740-1860, and the vault was finally closed in 1929. The same thing happened with the Bellingham vault. So now we're inside the church, and here's a monument in the memory of Lieutenant General Hugh Stafford, and his mother was Mary Smith of Maine, and the Smiths were distant cousins of the Bellinghams. When you enter the porch of the church, you kind of more or less walk on this monument here. The inscription is well worn at this stage, but this brass still remains, and you can see the nice ornate coat of arms with two kind of jams there as the crest. This monument was recorded by Isaac Butler in 1744, and the inscription was in Latin. It's no longer visible, but the inscription was to the physician Charles Guither of Dublin. He died in 1692. His sister Alice Clark erected the monument, and in her will in 1732 she wished to be buried near her brother at Castlebellingham. So now here's a view of the inside of the church, facing on to the east window, and we've got the Holy Family displayed on the 3 panels: Saint Joseph, our Lord, and Our Lady, the Mother of God. And we'll take a little more detail on the inscription that's underneath the window there. So it's in memory of Berkeley Buckingham Stafford and his wife, and then it was donated by the members of the parish. And the other panel remembers Hester Frances Bellingham, and she was the wife of Sir William, the first Baronet, and she died in 1844. This single window here was erected by the rector in AD 1852, and the rector in question was Robert Lepore McClintock, who died in 1879, and you can see the McClintock arms there on the window. Elsewhere, there's the impaled arms of McClintock and Hayland. Maria Hayland was his wife. This is the McCann window in memory of Thomas McCann, who died 1848, aged 79, and the window was erected by his widow, and she was Mary Morris from County Galway, and the initials TM appear several times on the window, and you see the impaled arms of McCann and Morris to represent his wife, and the McCann motto translates as "His virtue prospered under pressure." So no pressure. Here's a brass to Sir Alan Bellingham. He died in 1827. He was the 2nd Baronet, and he died in France, and his wife is also remembered there. And here's a coloured version of the arms that we saw on the door going into the castle. So again, the quartered arms, Bellingham. Burnside, there was the old heiress, the old family, the heiress that the Bellinghams married in north of England. The Moore arms and Montgomery. So we move on. Let me get this thing to move here. Here we are. So here's a brass to to Captain Geoffrey Barrow. He died in 1918 in France, and he was a member of the Royal Field Artillery, and he was the son of Sir Edmund and Lady Barrow. So here's a brass in honour of the brave and true men connected with this parish who served in the Great War, 1914 to 19. Again, many of the names on this monument here, in this brass, would overlap with the ones that we saw in the memorial outside early on. So just to maybe just our attention to the first 6 who died or who were killed in the war or died from their wounds. The first was J.O.B. Treadwell, H.J. Nixon, W.F.C. Garston, R. Hussey, W.R.A. Leyland, and L.G. Musk. And this is the final monument that we look at, and it brings together some of the families that were kind of related to each other. So this monument was erected in memory of John Wolsey, Esquire. He was the son of Reverend William Wolsey of Priorland and his wife Mary Ann, daughter of the late Alan Bellingham. So in that red square there we've got the first generation, then the second generation we've got John Wolsey, and John's wife was Janet, the daughter of John Jemison, so that gives us a Wolsey Jemison connection. And then their children are noted here as well, John and Janet Wolsey, and one of the daughters, Helen Jemison Thornhill. So there was 2 daughters that married 2 Thornhill brothers. So we had the Bellingham daughter married Wolsey, and then there was Wolsey then married Jemison, and then they had 2 daughters that married Thornhill, providing the relation between Bellingham, Wolsey, Jemison, and Thornhill. So back to our map. So we leave the castle and we head towards the central green here and out the Annagassan direction, and we take in the pubs on the way as well. If we get thirsty during this hot weather, we could drop in. This is the flour mill that fronts on the main street. It dates from 1866. It has been sympathetically modified for shops and apartments. Conserve Limited, along with Dr. Thomas Brennan, carried out a detailed survey and managed the conservation works. A little further out, as we head out towards Annagassan on the left, is the entrance to the malt house that now largely serves as a residential area for apartments and so forth. So just turning back a wee bit, back into the village again. Here's Burns Pub here on the corner. It's got a nice ornate doorway, and the old Guinness sign is there as well, and it says PJ Burns Bar. The Burns came to Castlebellingham in 1913 from Colville, and the first gentleman was Patrick Byrne, and his wife was Catherine. He died in 1946. His son Patsy and his wife Jane Morgan then ran the shop and the bar, and it's still run by the family to this day, so more than 100 years. So on the weekend of the 16th of July, so today is Sunday the 18th when I'm recording this, the brewery tavern was reopened its doors with the new name over the door of Heaney's. Brian has returned to run the pub, and he has our good wishes. This is the oldest pub in the village. During some recent renovations, a sign was located, and it was dated roughly 1794. In the 1901-1911 census, it was Charles Hamill who ran the pub, and the Hamills had it for quite a time after this. The late Thomas Hamill died young at the age of 34 in 1962. So sometime then after this, roughly about 1971, Tyrone man Noel Gormley and his wife Bridie purchased the pub, and they ran it until 1989. It was then changed ownership when Kevin and Mary Mulholland bought it, and they sold it in 2000. And very recently, the pub has got a new name on the door. It's got Heaney's, and it's now being run by Brian Heaney. So Brian kindly showed me this picture on the wall. It's an artist's impression from the pub from Gormley's time, with the Rennicks there in the background. A correspondent writing in 2004 in the Drogheda Independent, as he said, put their head on the block, saying he thought it was the oldest pub in the village. And I quote, "I can safely say, in all honesty, that over 300 years ago it was owned by a family of the name Hoy, or Hoy, and it was called a sheaf of barley." This is the third pub in the town, McBride's, and as you see there, the sign says it was established in 1908. Catherine McBride was a widow in the 1911 census. She was a publican, and her daughters Alice and Bridget were shop assistants. It remained in the McBride family until it was sold in 1976. So here's the photograph in the newspaper. It was auctioned. The auction took place on Monday, 20th of June, 1976. And Tom Heaney, who died in 2000, and his wife Mary, they bought the pub and they ran it. And then Brian, who we saw there in the pub, in the new pub, just opened. This was his family, and Brian ran this pub then until it was sold in 2005. So the 1976 photograph shows the bar, and Paul's shop was beside it. In 2000, so the Heaney name then was on the pub during that time, but then when the pub was sold in 2005, the pub was renamed McBride's. In 1911, in the 1911 census, the other two publicans listed in Castlebellingham were Patrick J. McGuinness, likely the previous owner of Burns, and Stephen Goodlow. So here's a collection of the post boxes from the village. Here's one in Kilceren that's no longer used. This is the modern one in the village, and this one here is on Heaney's, what's now Heaney's pub, or the brewery tavern. It's kind of an old ornate one, as it were. Okay, so we head out towards Annagassan again, and on your left is this rather large house with some ornate features. It was lived in by the O'Connor family for many years until the 1990s. Sergeant O'Connor was well known locally. Over the door is the IHS motif and a religious figure, possibly Our Lady. So So here we are now. We just move out the road another tiny bit, and we are now in what's known locally as the Crescent. And this house here was built about 1900. It's currently vacant, owned by Derry Clark. In all likelihood, it was associated with the brewery. So here's the brewery on the banks of the Glide, behind that house that we showed you there on the road. This is the former brewery, which is a red brick factory complex built during the 1860s to the 1880s. The brewery was founded by the Wolsey family, later run by John Wolsey in conjunction with the Doherty Brewery of Wolsey and Jameson on the New Quay. So you can see this decorative panel here. It was taken from a no-real window, and it incorporates the company's initials, JW and company. You can see the J there and the W and the company. Here we can see one of the display panels around the village. This details the old brewery at the Crescent. And here's the sign that currently marks the factory that's there now. So it says Small Wares Limited, established 1936, Dormer Limited. There's an old photograph of the barrels there. The brewery closed in 1923 when the manager, Charles Thornhill, moved to Belfast. So here's another photograph that Brian has in the pub. Another photograph of the brewery, which was in full swing. Here's a photograph of the employees, and I'm sure some local people might recognise some of their forebears, as it were. So we're still at the Crescent. So this is the house at the Crescent that was lived in by Charles Thornhill when he left in 1923. This location was also known as Castle Cozy. The house was built by the Wolseys, but the main branch of the Wolseys moved to Milestown shortly afterwards. John Wolsey of Castle Cozy died in 1887. Subsequently, Thornhills moved here. After they left, the house was changed into flats, and Garda Jim Cleary and his wife were one of the early residents. So sadly, it's kind of in a room now. So that's where the brewery is there. Number 6 is the brewery, and number 7 is the Thornhill house. And now we're going to turn around and we head back in towards the village, and we're going to cross the River Glide and head over into the townland of Kilceren. So as we go, the football pitch and the GA house will be on our left of the O'Connell's Club, and we're going to take in the old school, the Catholic church, and the graveyard, and we'll pass the gateway of Milestown and a few other little bits and pieces as we go along. So here's the old school, Church of Ireland School. It's on our right as we head out, and this school was built about 1825, and there's the gateway there, and you can see the front door, so you can see the large hall there, type of thing, that was part of the school. This is Kilceren Lodge, also on our right, and there's a road going up into some houses there now. Carrying along then on our left, here's the familiar gateway, and that gateway leads in to Milestown House. There's a good long avenue going in. I've never been in, but maybe we might get to do a live excursion at some stage. So this is the house here that was lived in by the Wolsey family. It was burned in the 1920s, but was rebuilt within the old walls, and it was designed by W.S. Barber in 1925, and it's been remarked that at least the shape has been preserved. So going further out the road, on our right are a series of terraced houses, and this is one of them here, and it would have been one of the brewery houses in Kilceren. Here's a photograph from Leslie's history of Kilceren House. The entrance was from behind the parish hall. By the 1930s, the house appears to have been vacant. In 1913, the bomb units were called out to the derelict house and had to do some defusing. And by 2016, it appears the house has been completely demolished. It's been remarked that these windows here correspond to the ballroom. It's kind of hard to see the round features there, but they might just be there in the white. I'm not too sure. But anyways, this is supposed to resemble this part of the house here, and then you can see the foot of it here after it was demolished, and you know, the bricks there and that. So it's kind of sad to see the end of a house. So we move on. This is St. Mary's Parish Hall. It was built by the Ancient Order of Hibernia, and it dates from about the 1920s, from what I gather from the newspapers. In the 1930s, there was an application for permission for dances, and there were actually 3 locations at that stage where dances could be held. One was in the hall, the second was in a hut for ex-servicemen on the site of Kilceren House, and Kilceren House itself. So here's the well-known Catholic Church, St. Mary's Church. The foundation stone was laid in 1814 by Canon Eugene O'Daly, and the sophisticated Gothic entrance was later added in 1854. And according to Christine Casey, the entrance has a 3-stage battlemented tower. It's got double-louved belfry flanked by battlemented wings, and the belfry itself was erected, as it says there, over the door in 1856. And again, the font here says that Father O'Daly was the first parish priest in Kilceren. So outside the church, you see these 2 fonts, and they're from the pre-1800 church that was at Greenmount. Kieran Campbell wrote in the last journal about the Newtown Stalabon font in the 2019 journal that was drawn by Niamh O'Brien, and he drew attention to some other local fonts of interest. So there's the church there in the background, and on the corner you've got the Chester Walsh burial place. The Chester Walshes donated the site for the erection of the church. Looking through the railings, you can see the In Derby foundry just roughly there. You see the In Derby, so the name In Derby, so that's the foundry that constructed the railings there. And behind that you can see that headstone there. And that particular headstone there is for James Chester Walsh. He died 1969, and his wife Marion 1999, Findlay 1962, Cecil 1917, and there's some of the detail there from the ironwork. And inside this monument here is inside the church, and it's to another member of the Chester Walsh family, Richard. He died in 1909 in Alderney. So staying outside before we head into the church, here's the gravestone of Constance Bellingham, wife of Sir Henry. This year, 2021, marks the centenary of his death. He died the 9th of June, 1921, and he was the 2nd president of the society, and he served for close on 20 years. It's interesting to note that the headstone was by James Pearce. You can see the J. Pearce there of Great Brunswick Street, and grateful to Stonewall Hall for that detail. James Pearce was the father of Pádraig Pearce, of course, and Pádraig was born in 1879 in Great Brunswick Street, and there's the Great Brunswick Street there on the foot of the headstone. Here's another gravestone that makes a connection with 1916. It's to Thomas Chute and his wife Jane. Jane was née Kelly, and Jane died in 1976, and to provide the link with 1916, as Jane's first husband was John Mallon. He was a civilian who was killed in Dublin, and you can see John's name there on the commemorative wall at Dublin, at Glasnevin. Staying in the graveyard, this is the ornate McGee gravestone to Michael McGee, who died in 1816, and it's by the well-known local sculptor Patrick Corrigan, and it was kind of signed by him, but a later inscription obliterated his signature. You can see bits of his signature there underneath there. But that's an example from another gravestone of the Pat Corrigan signature, Pat Corrigan sculpture. So that there's some nice decorative features. And as we say, Michael McGee died in 1816, so that's the period that the gravestone dates from. So here's another gravestone with some more detail. It's the O'Gorman gravestone. We got the inscription from Leslie's history, but it's likely by Corrigan because of the familiar features there. And this is the gravestone of Father Eugene O'Daly, who died in 1822. So we're back into the entrance of the church, and we're now going to go inside and visit the church. So on entering the porch, the first inscription reminds us that Father O'Daly was appointed to the parish by Primate O'Reilly, and he took charge in 1791, and the first stone was laid in 1814, and Father O'Daly, as we said, died in 1822. And may he rest in peace, then concludes the inscription. This circular window here looks to be reasonably modern, the stained glass, and it shows the ascension scene, Christ, the apostles around him before he ascends. And here's two stone heads there on either side there. This is the rather elaborate Chester monument. It was erected by Michael Chester of Stonehouse and John Chester of Kilceren House that we mentioned earlier on. And the monument was erected in memory of their parents. Michael Chester died 1814, and Annie's wife died 1838. And again, it reminds us down there near the bottom that they dedicated the grounds in which the church stands. This is a stained glass window that shows the evangelists. So we've got Mark, Matthew, John, and Luke. The style on this stained glass window is rather unusual. The only other place where I've seen stained glass windows like this are in the chapel in Fair Street that was lived in by the Presentation Sisters before the soldiers, and they moved onto Green Hills Secondary School. So this is the stained glass window then in memory of Constance Bellingham, who died in 1891. That was Sir Henry's first wife. We saw the photograph of the wedding when he married secondly. And there's the inscription there. The window was erected to the memory of the Lady Constance Bellingham, who died in 1891. And it was erected by her friends as a tribute of respect and esteem. So this brings to an end our little slideshow. I'm grateful to a lot of people for help with various aspects. Margaret Campbell, Brian Rogers, Donald Hall, Lindis Linus Cunningham, and Brian Healy. And finally, here's a link to the Society's webpage, www.clahs.ie. And finally, then, just to wrap up, here's a collection of the Della Roba revival plaques by Sir Henry around various parts of the village. So there may be a few more, but I just brought a collection of them there together. So agus an amseo a ríis go déisih slán agus scura maithagh agus slán